Am I in the wrong for declining to give money to my deceased ex-husband's children, particularly after they attempted legal action against me? My late ex and I were parents to 3 children. We ended our marriage because he struggled with mental health challenges and he wouldn't seek treatment. Shortly after, he remarried, but that marriage also ended, and they had 2 children. Those 2 failed marriages in just 5 years eventually led him to get help, and he really did improve, and we became close friends again. When he became ill, couldn't work anymore, and faced overwhelming medical debt, I offered for him to come live with me and our children. When he died, I set up Social Security for my kids and carried on with my life, and I figured his second wife did the same. All the children are now adults. About 3 years ago, I was served with a court summons. His other 2 kids claimed their father had remarried me, and I had stolen all his money for myself and my children. Essentially, I was portrayed as a villain, and they were determined to get what they believed was rightfully theirs. This was absolutely false. I never remarried my ex-husband. Even though we lived together as a family for close to 6 years, there was no romance at all, and it would have been absurd to remarry him. His medical expenses were enormous. There wasn't any money to spare for any of the children because he didn't have any money. It was okay with me when his children would visit, which was typically half the time except for the 2nd and 6th years. However, I never acted like their parent. The reason we have some financial security now is due to the fact I managed to build a successful career, and my present husband was already in a stable position when we got together. I attempted to communicate with them, but they refused and insisted on going before a judge. In the courtroom, once the official documents were presented, they changed their stance, arguing that my former partner essentially stayed home to care for me, which allowed me to develop my career. This didn't succeed, and their claim was thrown out. Now, not only are they still financially struggling, but they've accumulated substantial legal fees. They're currently complaining to anyone who will listen about how awful I am for financially ruining teenagers, and how they're even less likely to be able to go to college because I won't be just. Some of our shared family members are suggesting I should be more concerned about these children, since they were basically my stepchildren, even though it wasn't legally defined, and that a family is not always clear-cut. They used underhanded tactics, and now they're facing the repercussions. That's not your issue. Poor behavior always has unfortunate results. I often say that wise choices result from experience. Experience comes from mistakes. And honestly, either they were deceiving their attorney, this case seemed like a lost cause, or the lawyer was counting on a settlement. Regardless, it isn't your problem. The lawyer got their payment. You likely explained the slim odds to them, but what's your reason for trying to talk them out of paying this person a hefty sum? It's probably one of those shady attorneys, taking advantage of angry, fatherless teenagers and promising them a payout if they apply pressure on their dad's former spouse, because the lawyer will get paid regardless. It's not the full truth. It's abundantly clear that you'll never be able to change how they see this issue. I'm convinced they honestly believe that you somehow treated them unfairly during all this complicated stuff. Still, that's their problem, not yours. Their situation would have been much more difficult if they had to care for their dying father. They can become part of the huge group of people who don't receive any financial support from their parents and have to figure things out on their own. You were an incredible person for assisting your former partner, and you don't owe anything to the children he fathered after your relationship ended. Plus, those kids still had their own mother. It seems like those children may have been minors when he passed away. If their mother didn't complete the paperwork with Social Security so that they could receive a portion of their father's death benefits, then too bad. It also sounds like the father and the wife might have split custody evenly, which could mean that there wasn't any child support agreement in place. It's also my wife's job to tell her children, though I wouldn't be shocked if they've heard a lot of their dad is a loser, even if financial aid wasn't really needed, if you know what I mean. These children could be thinking something like, "Dad doesn't pay," hoping he doesn't ever find out the truth. It's kind of amusing because I'm sure those kids didn't become his heirs to pay any of his debts, presuming he had any. All right, now for this next thing, am I supposed to be angry with Hal for not helping pay for my stepkid's college? I, who am 49, have 2 stepchildren, Leo, a 19-year-old boy, and Adam, a 17-year-old boy. I came into their world when they were just 7 and 5, and despite my best intentions, they never really warmed up to me at all. I wasn't trying to be their mom, but just another supportive parent in their lives. They made it clear to their dad that they disliked me immensely when we got engaged, and they basically told my husband they didn't want him to get married. Their dad promised them they'd always be a huge part of his life, and asked them to give me a chance. We even tried asking their mother for help, but she wouldn't. They declined to attend the wedding and wouldn't spend the holidays with their dad if I was going to be there. This really stung me for a long time, but eventually, I sort of learned to accept that this was how things were destined to be, so I just focused on my own biological children. Even though my husband always held onto the idea that one day we could all be a big, happy, blended family. The loss of my husband came about through a devastating accident. Things were incredibly difficult, and following the burial, Leo and Adam essentially vanished from our lives. They hardly recognized their 18 siblings at the family gatherings with my husband's relatives, which made me feel quite down for them. Now, looking ahead, my niece, who is my sister-in-law's daughter, is preparing to begin college, and I promised her a payment of $30,000 after her second year. My spouse had a great affection for his sister and his niece, so this was something I was delighted to do. Leo and Adam got wind of this, and they found out that their father had a substantial life insurance policy, and I was the sole recipient. Additionally, my small business is currently generating a substantial amount of revenue. They contacted me, very angry that I was selfishly keeping their father's money all to myself, and warning they would take legal action if I refused to disclose the amount I received and share half. I was frustrated, but I calmly clarified that firstly, life insurance isn't the same thing as an inheritance, therefore, they had no legal right to the funds. Secondly, when I initially got the money, I provided a portion to their mother, so she could safeguard it until they became adults. They refused to believe me until I provided the evidence. Apparently, their mother used the money to take care of their expenses, leaving them with absolutely nothing. Since I invested some of the insurance money into launching my business, my mother-in-law is asking me to cover the costs of Leo and Adam's education, but I really don't want to. Can you believe it? They haven't talked to me in ages, and the first time they do is to ask for money. My mother-in-law told me to consider my own kids and how Leo and Adam might take out their anger on them. Frankly, if that's a possibility, then I have no interest in encouraging a relationship between them. Is that a good point, Hal? That's all I want to say about that. I keep reiterating this, so I'll include it here as well. First, the life insurance policy was through my husband's employment, so I was automatically the beneficiary. My husband had the option to change it, but he never did it. Secondly, although my stepchildren weren't listed on the policy, we always had an unspoken agreement that I'd share some of the funds to help Leo and Adam out, which is why I gave it to their mother. Third, no, there wasn't an official will in place, although it was my husband's plan to create one when he turned 60, but he passed away in his late 40s. Fourth, regarding survivor benefits, I can't say for sure if Leo and Adam received any, because they never spoke to me or sent me anything in the mail. I'm assuming their mother took the money I gave her and didn't anticipate needing any more. Again, just to reiterate, I'll add this in. 1. While I'm not comfortable sharing the exact dollar amount, I can say I gave their mother approximately 40% of the total policy amount. That's the same percentage I set aside for my own kids, while retaining 20% for myself as the surviving spouse. I used part of my 20% to launch my company. I chose not to set up a trust fund for them because I had faith in their mother to do what she felt was right for them, and I didn't monitor things. Before they reached out, I was completely unaware that my stepchildren lacked funds for their college education. My spouse and I didn't have wills at that time, since we believed we were too youthful for such things. However, since he died, I've drawn up my own. I'm sure they're free to try, but I highly doubt they'll be able to successfully sue me for anything, considering the majority of my husband's savings went to cover the funeral expenses and his outstanding debts. The home where we resided was a present from my family, with the understanding that it would only be in my name. I also care for my sister-in-law's daughter, and we have a bond, which is why I'll be giving her $30,000. That sum won't cover everything, but it's a solid starting point. Don't let anyone pressure you into using your life insurance money and your own hard-earned money on children who aren't appreciative. You're not obligated to them. My mother-in-law asked me to consider my biological children and how Lee and Adam might vent their bitterness towards them. They already barely even recognize them as half-siblings, so there's nothing more for them to resent. I find her audacity astonishing. As if she doesn't have a clear view of her oldest grandchildren's treatment of their younger siblings. My mother-in-law can fund those too. Leave me out of it. She could also address the situation with the first wife of her son. That would be a better option. It's not like this is happening regularly. Both Leo and Adam are already showing signs of being annoyed with their half-siblings. On top of that, I already gave money to their mom for their benefit, but she spent it all. What I do with my money is my decision. Honestly, I don't have any obligations to them. Sure, they should really be discussing this with their mother, but I imagine they realize the funds are depleted, so they're going to try to get something out of Opie. I've seen this happen a lot. In-laws and other family members will often act like anything their relative brought into the home was theirs alone, but anything the spouse contributed or received is considered communal. I also think that if Opie had put the money in a trust for the kids, with her as the manager, they'd have accused her of controlling everything, or just wouldn't trust her to honor her word. It's just a constant thing. It's been years since they last spoke to me. They hardly acknowledge their siblings. I literally gave their mom money specifically for them. Why would they even assume that? It's absurd for them to think that way. They feel entitled to more money for college. Moving on to the next story. Am I the bad guy for refusing to divide money from my son's college fund to give to my stepdaughter? My stepdaughter's father is incredibly rich. I only have one son from a prior marriage. Her father stated he already had a college fund set up for her, so we didn't bother setting up a college fund for her, since, technically, she already had one. When the time came for my stepdaughter to head off to university, she approached her dad for the funds, and he admitted he'd squandered the money on his various affairs throughout the years. My stepdaughter then requested another college fund, considering he already had a substantial fortune, yet he declined. So my stepdaughter turned to my wife and me, and the only solution proposed to secure her college money was to take the funds from my son's account. My wife is ready to go along with this, but I'm hesitant. It feels unjust, and we were under the impression that he still possessed that money. Therefore, it doesn't seem right for my son to bear the consequences. My stepdaughter has expressed her hatred for my wife and me, and my in-laws are calling me a heartless jerk. They're claiming I'm indifferent to her future. I don't believe I should be the one receiving the blame for this, when her father is truly the one who deserves the criticism. Am I truly acting like a bad person in this scenario? Now, let's look at some popular comments. You're not being the bad guy. You were under the impression that she already had a college fund. You established a college fund for your own child, and you weren't required to divide or share it with someone who was supposed to already be covered. Your stepdaughter isn't the villain either. She has every right to be disappointed in the circumstances and angry at you, even. Her dad, however, that's the one who messed up big time for using his daughter's college savings that he told both my wife and I that he had, particularly since he's not short on funds. I think the situation is pretty messed up. It seems like your wife's daughter should have had her own college savings account, because it doesn't make sense that a single parent should have to cover the costs, even if one partner is wealthier. If her funds were kept separate from her ex, I bet she would have been putting money into it anyway. I don't think it's fair. The stepdaughter has no right to be angry with you, and she's aiming her frustration in the wrong direction. She should be mad at her dad, honestly. Seriously, what the heck? Plus, her dad has the financial means, yet he refuses to pay for her education while you don't. I understand they saved for a long time, and I agree that your son shouldn't have to suffer because her wealthy dad is just being difficult. My wife would have likely helped her out financially if they weren't divorced. You're not the bad guy here. You should have your wife review her divorce documents. The financial responsibilities are usually outlined in those papers. If the father is responsible, sue him for the college fund. Hang on, so the dad made a promise and then went back on it, but the stepdaughter blames you? You're definitely not in the wrong. I mean, the only person truly at fault is the stepdaughter's father. He clearly has the money but chose to punish his daughter for some reason. However, as her parents, you're also at fault for trusting him and not having a backup plan. Do you mean neither of them had enough knowledge of the guy to anticipate this outcome? Looks like someone didn't learn anything from their own divorce. I can't figure out why he would choose that specific account for the money, but apparently the guy is loaded. It feels like he never really wanted to foot the bill for college from the start. Okay, the final story. Am I the jerk for requesting my stepson switch bedrooms once the new baby gets here? My spouse has 2 children. His daughter, Cassie, is 17, and his son, Brad, is 10. Cassie chose to live with her mom full-time once she hit 16, as was her right legally. My husband and his ex-wife have joint custody of Brad alternating weeks. This past January, my husband made a decision to relocate to a new city 2 hours away by plane and buy a house. So, we'd be forced to fly back every other week. We still have an apartment in our former city. For when we have Brad with us since he attends school there. From January until now, about 4 months have passed, and Brad has spent a total of 5.5 weeks at our new house for holidays and school breaks. He stayed for a couple of weeks in January, a half week in February, another half week in March, and 2 weeks in April. Our new house has 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom, which my husband and I use, is at the end of a long corridor. Brad's room is right next to ours, which is where he stays when he comes to visit during school breaks. There's an area situated between my son Brad's bedroom and the other one that we've converted into an office area, complete with a desk and a chair. Cassie's room, where she stays during school breaks, is the next room. Beside Cassie's room is a room we don't use very often. I'm over 5 months pregnant right now, and I've floated the idea of moving Brad into the spare room or Cassie's room, because she's only been here for a couple of weeks over the last 4 months and doesn't seem to mind, because she doesn't think of it as her bedroom. I'm thinking we should make Brad's existing room the nursery. My partner doesn't want the baby sleeping in our room, even though experts advise it to lower the possibility of SIDS, which is why I'd prefer the baby be in the room right next to us, so he will be close. The thought of SIDS makes me really nervous. This is my first biological baby, and it would soothe my worries to know he's at least next door, so I could quickly check on him if necessary and hear him. Brad doesn't want to switch rooms, and my husband is siding with him. He's suggesting the baby's room should be at the far end of the hall, 3 bedrooms away. His feeling is that if SIDS happens, there isn't anything we can do to prevent it. We've seriously clashed on this issue. He believes that relocating Brad's room will make him feel, and I quote, like he's losing his place in the family, as though we don't care about him as much. Personally, I feel that for Brad, the house is more like a vacation spot. He's only here during breaks and doesn't consider it his real home, plus he hasn't spent much time actually staying in that specific room. The possibility of reducing my stress and minimizing the chances of SIDS makes it seem reasonable to request Brad change rooms, considering he's only stayed in it for a short while. Am I the bad guy here? I'm not a total jerk, but please don't try to use the "it's my first biological child" excuse. It's not relevant and actually strengthens the idea that he's being demoted. The nursery is needed by the baby because, well, it's a baby. It's not because he shares your DNA. When my own baby arrived, I was really keen on him getting used to sleeping in his own crib, in his own room from the start, so I put our guest bed in the nursery and spent the first 6 months sleeping there. You'll be getting up with the baby multiple times each night for months on end. And the closer the baby is, the less complicated everything is, and the simpler it is for you to go back to sleep. I wholeheartedly suggest putting an extra bed in the nursery, but I'm concerned it might imply to your husband that you'll handle all the night duties. You really need to talk to your husband immediately about how involved he plans to be with the baby's nighttime awakenings. Since he doesn't want the baby in your room, while also being all right with the nursery being so far from your bedroom, it seems like he expects to avoid those late-night hall trips and anticipates leaving it all to you. Even if you're nursing, he could still wake up to change the diaper and bring the baby to you, or he could walk and comfort the baby when she's up but not hungry. This guy needs to be ready to contribute equally, and it doesn't sound like he's preparing to do so. My husband is against the baby sleeping in our room, even though doctors recommend it to lessen the risk of SIDS. That's the actual issue you need to confront. I believe you should address that issue first before even considering asking your stepson to relocate. Honestly, it seems to me like your husband is the only one acting poorly. And out of interest, how different are the sizes of your stepson's current room and the room you want him to move into? The room sizes are identical. His room, Cassie's room, and the extra room are all designed the same way. They are all the same size, have the same closet space, are on the same side of the house, and all 3 have a window. The idea that SIDS is inevitable anyway needs to be discarded. Whoa, hold on a second. If my spouse had ever uttered those words to me during my pregnancy, I'd have seriously reconsidered our entire dynamic. Frankly, it's a pretty heartless and nasty thing to say about the baby that's on its way. And it's totally false. Being near parents does, in fact, help guard against SIDS, and you're absolutely going to have to get up multiple times every night to feed the little one. Therefore, the baby really ought to be as close to you as humanly possible. What a jerk. I'd insist that my husband go to both some parenting classes and some couples therapy, like right now.